just going to go over a car teardown today, just so that, I mean, everybody here is accomplishing ripping cars apart and that kind of stuff, but what we want to kind of cover the bases on and just get down to step A, B, C, D, and E, because we're hiring so many new people and they have to know every step. They're not there where we can miss steps and jump over things and that kind of stuff, right? So what we want to do here today is just tackle a car, not like you're brand new, but how we would teach a brand new person for us. So this scenario here is going to be double dash displacement with a roof flap forward. So and the strategies or the techniques that we use to do it, right? So obviously when the call comes in is when we start making our plan, right? Mechanisms of injury, how many cars are involved, time of day, weather, all that kind of stuff comes into play on how we're going to action this thing. We're going out of town. Is it down an embankment? Are we taking 4 guys for ropes? That kind of stuff. We get to the scene. Incident command needs to do, whether it's in the city or out of the city, incident command needs to do a size up. So this size up is a car plowed into the back of a tractor trailer. The only injuries are the occupants in this car. So as we're approaching it, if Graham was running this call and he had 2 guys on the truck and 4 guys from station 7, I would task somebody instantly to create a tool cache for full extrication, right? And task somebody to chalk the tires right away. And that could be you getting off the truck and opening up that first cabinet, and you know what I mean? Do we need to do that if it's buried in the back of a trailer? No. Is it a step we need to teach? Yes, because we could have a minor MVI inside the city that's not requiring extrication, but we still have to stabilize, we still have to chalk the tires. So it's just a step in our process and part of training, right? As we approach a vehicle, we're making verbal contact. Either you're going to get a response or you're not going to get a response. You're looking in the window. What are some of the indicators that a dash displacement would be happening? Yeah, and what do you visually see with that?
Front end's crumpled in.
Front end's crumpled in, steering wheel in your nuts, your legs are deformed.
Frame's bent up.
Frame's bent, yeah, all those good things, right? So we look in there and we see what's happening, and we're looking, if they're verbally talking to us, ask them where they're hurting, they can tell you where their injuries are, and then you can simply just say to the guys, we're doing a roof flap forward, double dash roll. And we should get to that point where that's the only command Graham would give. And we're going to set up for that. So if we have 2 patients, we're going to want to have 4-point stabilization, right? So for me, if we had enough people on the scene, let's come around this side. What we want to, if we can determine it, if we have enough people on scene, we want to try to action, whether we determine it or the ambulance is telling us who's the worst patient, right? So let's say the driver's the worst patient. So this is where I'm going to want to start my cribbing, because we know we're doing a double dash roll, roof flap forward. We have to remove this hood and this fender to make relief cuts behind the strut, correct? Right? So what do we want to do? We want to start actioning this car right away. So Graham will assign Larzy vehicle stabilization 4 points. So he starts here and he does that. Now Graham and I can go to tear the hood off. This corner's stable. We can get into it, right? As we're getting into it, Graham assigns Richard softening the vehicle. And then we're going to start here. We're going to start going around this car. And we'll skip back. We've already made patient contact. We've already got the car in park if we could, the e-brake set, the ignition off. Is the car safe when the ignition gets rolled to off? It's good to go. If we can visually see a battery when we do a hood removal, for sure, disconnect it. But what are the parameters for non-battery disconnect? Peel and peek, and don't get between undeployed airbags. Because on a car rollover upside down, are we disconnecting a battery? We still gonna action the car? Yeah. Right? We remove this hood, there's no battery. Are we gonna go fishing? Or are we gonna get into our extrication? So we just stay clear of uncharged or undeployed airbags and that kind of stuff. So we got patient contact, the patient's covered up, that kind of stuff. Richard's now gonna soften this car, right? So before we get to that, the cribbing, everybody can see what I've done here, right? That block is up, it's flush with the car, and your wedge is on the ground. If we're gonna have a tripping hazard, it'll be on the ground, it won't be 6 inches in the air. Does that make sense? Because if I had to, I could step on this and walk over it. If I had to. If I trip on it, it's in a spot where I can reset it. And if I'm actioning this door, hood, fender, Graham can monitor this while displacing the door. Does that make sense? If we use a step shock and we slam that in there instead, what's going to happen when we blow the door off?
It's in the road.
Yep. What happens when we blow the fender off? What happens when we want to cut that A-post low to be able to displace the dash? It's in the road, right? So try to get it as flush as we can and keep the wedge on the ground. When we assign somebody to soften the car, if we had 2 patients in here, Graham can assign 2 people to soften the car. And what do we mean by softening the car? We're breaking glass and we're cutting seat belts, right? So when we're breaking glass, we want to use our big boy voice because there's people in here underneath the blanket. And in this case, there's 2 people in here underneath the blanket with a rescuer. So we want to make sure we yell at them breaking glass. I like to see, and I want to see, everybody breaking glass high on calls. And why do we do that?
Doesn't go down your cuff.
Doesn't go down your cuffs, 100%, right? So when we approach driver side window, passenger side window front, some models in the passenger rear, what are we seeing now?
Laminated.
Laminated glass. So how do we deal with that? It just stays in place, right? Leave it. So this, do I need to hit it again to say that that's laminated glass? No. If this is here, a lot of times in the bottom corner, it will tell you if it's laminated glass or not. Am I going to go to look for it? No. Most vehicle rollovers, this will shatter or spriter like the windshield would. You're going to know. But if it didn't do anything, I'm going to do one hit. Breaking glass! I broke glass. My hand was nowhere near it. It was on the safe side of the B-post, roof line, whatever you want to do. Use your tool, punch the glass in. Okay? So then, we have patient contact. So instantly, if you're the car softener, you want to pull that seatbelt tight. You're communicating with the rescuer inside. I'm cutting the seatbelt. Cut the seatbelt, it's off. Right? The scenario here, if it had laminated glass or it was a T-bone scenario where the door is inward, we want to try and attack these hinges first to start taking that door away from the patient, especially on a T-bone, because they're going to be smashed up against the console. We want to take the pressure off their hips. We don't want to put a set of spreaders right by their head and go vertical crush or squeeze the door. And why do we not want to do that?
You haven't peeked and peeled yet.
Haven't peeked and peeled yet, exactly. And then the safety of the patient. If I want to create a purchase point right here, there's 2 things we can do. Most MVIs we go to on a T-bone, this will roll out, we'll see the hinge. You can go right above the hinge, open it up, and we open it up so that when we cut it, we can do what? We're getting those tips past that hinge, right? We don't want to tip load when we do a cut. You don't want to try to cut a hinge that isn't opened up. You want to be able to see past that location and dive that cutter into the throat of the cutter, right? So how do we make purchase points to get the tips of the cutter in? Well, we can spread right here because we're a good 1.5 away from the patient, and you can spread off your A, spread off the door here, and that will roll that open. And once that rolls open, go vertical with your tips, get on top of that hinge, open it up, make a cut. Drop the spreaders down to the hinge, go as far as you can, make that bottom cut, right? And when they're making that bottom cut, you can come over here. You have the protection of the B-post for your patient. You can get your tips in there, blast the door off the pin, right? We never had to peek and peel. And that technique we're sort of using, or attacking the hinges first, because laminated glass is becoming so much a part of our calls. If your hinges is exposed and you can attack it without ripping the fender and all that kind of stuff apart and compromising that, because we will have to blow it off later, you can go for the hinge, or what we can do is go for window frame. So you put your pry tool in there. I carry a wedge, right? I can open this up with my wedge. Drop that in there so I don't lose my wedge, and now I have a nice gap to put my spreaders in there and start working my way down to the hinge set. It's a good move to use if this is still has glass inside it, laminated glass. That would be our purchase point. Does that make sense? Cool. So we go around the car, we soften it, Breaking glass. Same thing here. Do we have to take this door if we're just actioning 2 patients here?
Nope.
No, leave it. Save time. Roof's going forward, right? Break the glass, cut the seat belt. Break the glass, pop the plastic. What are we looking for in here?
Airbag cylinder.
Yeah, what are we looking for in here?
Cylinder.
We don't need to through here because we're not making any cuts. Here, if we're making the roof flap forward, I like to make a mark with the handle of my pry tool. Make a mark in the roof line, simply on both sides, so that this folds forward evenly. Does that make sense? Once the door's blown off, we can pop the plastic here to see if there's a cylinder there. We work our way around, or if we have 2 guys softening, they go from front to back. If we're gonna action this roof, I would rather break this before we start folding it and have it shatter. Can we use the edge of this sunroof as our pivot point and make a cut and take the roof backwards? Sure. Some sunroofs, if they're like this is just an insert, it's not a slider, but the sliders have those hardened steel rails in here. So when you go to tip that forward, you might be fighting it if you cut it along that line. So this one here, because this isn't a slider, your option is you could probably cut right through here and take the roof backwards. Right? It all depends on how incident command wants to tackle it and what he sees. But by leaving the rear doors in here, this is my cut line for my B post. I've broken glass, I've cut the seat belt, I've popped the plastic off because Graham has told me we're doing a double dash displacement with a roof removal. I know this is where we need to cut. What would change the location of the cut here?
You're taking the door?
So, just a cylinder. What's from here to here in a car? Seatbelt slider. Pretensioner's in the seat, right? Or down the bottom. So either we're going to cut real low, which we want to do, or we're going to cut real high. We don't want to try to cut through that slider. Right? Come here, same thing. Dan made a good point yesterday. A lot of times at the class, if you're on scene on an engine company and the rescue truck's taking a while to get there, we want to keep everything as flush as possible so that when we're working here, whether it goes forward or backwards, we're not getting snagged up on stuff. But if we're making these cuts off of engine 7, what's going to be the fastest cut? Up high, right? If we're doing an extrication with the rescue truck and we can accommodate it, down low. Does that make sense? Cool. So when we blow the door off, so we assign somebody to soften the car. We're getting going here now. We're actioning this door. We're bringing the door off. The hood's gone. The door's gone. The fender's coming out. We locate the strut, which is always going to be the center of the tire, right? And we need to make a pie cut behind the strut and in front of the firewall. We got to pop the plastic on the A-post, cut through the A-post, right? So that we can ram this dash forward. If we're working in a pair of 2, there is no reason why we need to work outside of this box. We don't need to run around. Okay? If this person is in worse condition than that person, there's only 4 people actioning in this car, we will focus on this corner. Make everything happen. So we're not running back and forth, The guy with the spreader can go over there. If this fender's blown off, the door's blown off, the fender's blown off, and now I have to make my release cut here, my release cuts here, and my release cuts here, Graham can go to the other side and start actioning that door. But until everything's blown off, there's no point in going back and forth. Does that make sense? Cool. Because then stuff sort of gets forgotten.
Stabilize, 4 points of contact, please.
Well, who's going to be the softener?
Larzy and Bins are going to do the emergency blow on the other side. Max, you can soften.
just think about, and I'm not gabbing you up, but this is just sort of a teachable moment to take when you're on teaching, right? And we think that there's dash displacement, right? The first thing, in my opinion, we should be actioning is this door. Because if we open that door and all of a sudden we see they may not be trapped by a dash, we're actioning this before we're actioning that. A lot of times, once we get the door up, we can really see down below where we couldn't see now and go, oh, their limbs aren't trapped, but they do have broken legs, right? So for me, I would action the door first and then finish it. So you can open up the door and then look in there and go, you have to strap on the legs and stop. Make sense?
perpendicular as possible.
Well, we're not going to get in there, so with that distance, we're not going to be able to accomplish that. So we're going to take the person up and over that. Right? See how it traveled up with it? So grab the sawzall just for shits and giggles one more time. Yeah. See how high it came up? So as it's coming up, we should be trying to cut that firewall out, keep that rocker as low as possible.
Are we touching the ground? Is that why it's lifting now?
No, we're just pulling it all up because it's still attached to here.